Here is the quiz for today. Yeah, we're not doing those. Yes. Oh wait, you know what? You have to take that.
Okay. Lovely. Oh wow, stuffing around. Okay.
Yeah, I don't get it. Okay, so take out a piece of paper. No books, remember, or phones for this, or computers. If you did the reading, you should be able to answer these. If you can't remember specifics, you can give me other details. Which one? Yes. Yeah, what's the, how do they find out that they were not? There's a lot of, yeah, there's a lot. So give me some of the details. See if you can remember the last thing that happened that fully like reveals them, but if you can't, you can give me some details about them. And then the felts are the last ones that we were reading about, the last family that he's staying with. then when you're done, just go ahead and go put it into the drawer. All right, when you're ready, take out word of the day. Are we out of place? Hang on to it. Just rush through that part. So we might come back. Yes. Where did it? Oh, I need it. Okay. Okay, last chance. Anyone need a word of the day? They are up here. Okay, so our word today is pastoral. Pastoral. Okay, pastoral is a work of literature, also be a work of art that portrays an idealized version of country life. Country road's a really good example. I guess it could be literature, art, music, anything, any sort of storytelling that presents country life as idealistic. That would be an example of pastoral art. So pastoral. So usually these are not meant for country, which word? Idealized, sorry. Right? Idealized version of country life. Usually these are not meant for people that are actually living in the country. Because if you're actually living in the country, you know what it's like. You know the good things about it, like, oh, it's beautiful out here and you get to be in nature. But you also know the bad things, like, oh, I don't have as good of access to healthcare, and I have to work at a farm all day long, and I get sunburned or whatever. So these stories are usually meant for people who live in like urban communities, so urban audiences. Like this is for people who live in the city and they're kind of romanticizing what the country might be like. Yeah, it's a fantasy of country living. Exactly. And part of that romanticization is that it turns complex issues into simplistic issues. Yeah. It's a little bit kid friendly. It's also just like, it's like living in cities or suburbs like we do here. A lot of you live in like, I think, country, but a lot of us live in the suburbs out here, right? You kind of start to like miss your connection with nature. Like you kind of start to miss like being able to garden or being able to like see wild animals and all of that. And so it's this way of like getting that without having to actually experience the hardships of it. So you can look at the art, you can experience how beautiful it is, and you can imagine a world where that exists and it's super nice and easy. But in reality, it's probably not so easy. And you're right, it is. It's linked to childhood and nostalgia. And a lot of that is because the artists that make this work sometimes have this experience themselves, where as children, they might have lived in the country and then they migrate to cities. And as whenever we've had great migrations happening where people are moving from the country to the city for whatever reason, we get more pastoral texts because people are like, oh, I remember what it was like when we were kids. You used to just run in the fields all day long. So it's got this nostalgic feel. And the last is that it's kind of has a critique of the city when it's presenting the landscape as so beautiful and wonderful. It's like industrialization has sort of overly complicated our lives. Have made our lives overly complicated. And if only we could just return to the country, everything would go back to clear and easy. So it's a lot of pastoral stuff. It's the morals of the story are very, very clear. There isn't a lot of gray area and what you should be doing or what sort of the consequences are. It's always good is rewarded by good, evil is rewarded by punishments. And yeah, that's the pastoral. So for your example, you're going to write down Hudson River School. You're going to look at some paintings. So the Hudson River School was an artistic movement. There was a school called the Hudson River School where a bunch of these artists went to school and they learned to paint landscapes. It was an American art movement. And it was supposed to be a way of showing how beautiful America was. Let me show you some of these. Okay, those are second. Okay, first we have the British version. That doesn't count. Let's go back to that one. There we go. That's a Hudson River School painting. I'm going to turn off the lights so you can actually see the colors a little bit better. Gorgeous, right? Highlights nature. Often there will be a tiny, actually it gets smaller, it gets bigger. A tiny little person or a tiny little house somewhere in the painting, but that is definitely not what we're highlighting here. And there are some paintings that will have tiny little people in them, but they'll look like they're being engulfed, overwhelmed by nature. What would you say is the tone of this painting? What did you say? Sorry, I can't hear. Oh. It's very big. Does it look ominous though? Yeah, a little, that's how I feel. It's a little bit, but not overwhelmingly so, more like a challenge rather than a place you'd never want to go. The colors are really warm and inviting. He's on this horse about to go into the sunshine. I think it looks really peaceful and calm to me. Here's another one. Again, there's a person. They're having a picnic down here and there's tiny little ships, but for the most part, you're looking at nature. Doesn't that have a similar sort of tone to it, a similar atmosphere? Here's an example with an actual person in the frame. I don't think this is the full thing, but you kind of see those warm colors again. Oh, this one's tiny, but this is a good example without the reds, but still very calm and peaceful and large open spaces. And you also in the pastoral, this is not from the Hudson River School, but you can kind of see how it like tends to romanticize like even like field work. Like the artist could have painted this in such a way that you notice that like their backs are hurting from their postures, or that they're sweating, or that they are like miserable in these circumstances, that the sun is beating down on them. But that's not the feeling I get from this painting. I get like calm and peacefulness, and like that they're actually connected to the land, you know, they seem like, it seems ideal to me. And even this one that highlights how much he's like struggling, still has this like kind of calm background to it. That one less so. And there was a prominent African-American artist at the time who was painting these same scenes, but featuring Black people, his name was Richard Norris Brooke. And you get these ideas of like simple country life, you know, and a family being together. And yes, they live in poverty, but you'll see how this doesn't necessarily stop them from having like the best life ever. They have music, they have each other, they are all centered around a dining room, a kitchen table that feels very like warm and cozy. Okay, so I'm gonna have you just write down now some effects of those paintings. What do you think the sort of emotional impact is of the scene? Yes, cottage tourism is a great example of the pastoral, yes. Animal Crossing is just a good pastoral story. Stardew Valley is pastoral. You played Stardew Valley way too much? Yeah, it's addicting, isn't it? And it's so good for anxiety. When I was like at my most anxious, I just like Stardew Valley for a couple hours. Okay, we are going to look in Hudson at where Mark Twain is using the pastoral. And I think he's making like a comment on the pastoral and its possibilities. So everybody pass that white paper. And then if you have your own art supplies, pull them out. And if not, I'm going to pass out some of mine. If you've got like colored pencils though, or anything like that. Okay, I'm gonna pass out art supplies. You gotta kind of share with each other because some of them are, you know, full of great colors and some of them are not. You know what? Let's put one more over here and then you pre-coached it around. Well, we have four. So. Like no. What if we all share? Okay. I'll keep it to myself. Yeah. These are very much education is underfunded art supplies, so share. Wait, right. JJ. I found out that. I'm gonna put up a river. Okay, I'm gonna trust you Are you guys ready to be done? Okay. So you need on your desk your paper, you need Hudson, and your art supplies, but other than that. Okay, let me get your flashlight.
It's all about this. It's my word.
Okay, let me, hang on 1 second. All right, let me get your attention. I'll explain to you what we're doing. So we are going to listen to a part of the book that we've already read. It's from the beginning of chapter 19. So everyone open up to the beginning of chapter 19. Page 93. All right, so here on page 93, I think that Huck is describing like one of these pastoral scenes. They are floating down the river. He and Jim are just hanging out. This is before the king and the duke come and interrupt things. So as you are listening to it, you are going to be kind of translating the tone of the book onto your page here. Don't use the back. We're gonna use the back for something else. So just on the front side of this page. Uh-oh, do you need another page already? Okay, just on the front side of this page, you are going to be kind of representing what this scene feels like. So when I say what it feels like, I'm talking more about colors that represent the sort of like atmosphere that it creates, or patterns that represent like the patterns of the river, the patterns of the language. It doesn't have to be representational. Like you don't have to actually draw a boat. You could if you wanted to, but you're kind of drawing as you listen. So you're listening to it. You're kind of following along a little bit as you draw. Does that make sense? You're drawing what you think the feeling is of the scene. Oh. Almost like the feeling, but I don't think that's the feeling of the scene. Does that make sense? You're like drawing the feelings? Yeah. Okay, cool. It's abstract. Okay. So this first one is about 8 minutes, and I want you to try and like fill up that the front side of that page by the time you're done listening. Katie, did you want? No, she already. No, I don't. Yeah. Can I put my finger in that? And again, if you're missing the colors that you need, then just borrow the person's next to you. Here we go.
Chapter 19. 2 or 3 days and nights went by. I reckon I might say they swum by. They slid along so quiet and smooth and lovely. Here's where we put in the time. It was a monstrous big river down there, sometimes 1.5 miles wide. We run nights and laid up and hit daytimes. Soon as night was most gone, we stopped navigating and tied up, nearly always in the dead water under a towhead, and then cut young cottonwoods and willows and hid the raft. Then we set out the lines. Next, we slid into the river and had a swim so as to freshen up and cool off. Then we sat down on the sandy bottom where the water was about knee deep and watched the daylight come. Not a sound anywhere, perfectly still, just like the whole world was asleep. Only sometimes the bullfrogs are clattering maybe. First thing to see, looking away over the water, was a kind of dull line. That was the woods on the other side. You couldn't make nothing else out. Then a pale place in the sky. Then more paleness spreading around. Then the river softened up way off and wasn't black anymore, but gray. You could see little dark spots drifting along ever so far away, trading scows and such things. And long black streaks, rafts. Sometimes you could hear a sweep squeaking, a jumbled up voice, because it was so still, and sounds come so far. And by and by, you could see a streak on the water, which you know by the look of the streak, there's a snag there in a swift current which breaks on it and makes the streak look that way. And you see the mist curl up off the water, and the east reddens up in the river. And you make out a log cabin at the edge of the woods, way on the bank on the other side of the river, being a wood yard likely, and piled by them cheats so you can throw a dog through it anywhere. Then the nice breeze springs up and comes fanning you from over there, so cool and fresh and sweet to smell on account of the woods and the flowers. And sometimes not that way, because they've left dead fish laying around, gars and such, and they do get pretty rank. And next you got the full day and everything smiling in the sun and the songbirds just going. A little smoke couldn't be noticed now, so we would take some fish off the lines and cook up a hot breakfast. And afterwards, we would watch the lonesomeness of the river and kind of lazy along, and by lazy off to sleep. Wake up by and by and look to see what done it, and maybe see a steamboat coughing along upstream, so far off towards the other side you couldn't tell nothing about her only whether she was a stern wheel or a side wheel. Then, for about an hour, there wouldn't be nothing to hear or nothing to see, just solid lonesomeness. Next, you'd see a raft sliding by, away off yonder, and maybe a galoot on a chop, because they're most always doing it on a raft. You'd see the axe flash and come down, you don't hear nothing. You see that axe go up again, and by the time it's above the man's head, then you hear the ka-chunk. It had took all that time to come over the water. So we put in the day, lazying around, listening to the stillness. Once there was a thick fog, and the rafts and things that went by was beating tin pans so the steamboats wouldn't run over. A scow or a raft went by so close, we could hear them talking and cussing and laughing. Heard them plain, but we couldn't see no sign of them. Made you feel crawl. It was like spirits carrying on that way in the air. Jim said he believed it was spirits, but I says, no, spirits wouldn't say during the dern fog. Soon as it was night, out we shoved. When we got her out about to the middle, we let her alone and let her float wherever the current wanted her to. Then we lit the pipes and dangled her legs in the water and talked about all kinds of things. We was always naked, day and night, whenever the mosquitoes had let us. The new clothes Buck's folks made for me was too good to be comfortable. And besides, I didn't go much on clothes nohow. Sometimes we'd have that whole river to ourselves for the longest time. Yonder was the banks and the islands across the water, and maybe a spark, which was a candle in a cabin window. And sometimes on the water you could see a spark or two on a raft or a scow, you know. And maybe you could hear a fiddle or a song coming over from one of them crafts. It's lovely to live on a raft. We had the sky up there, all speckled with stars, and we used to lay on our backs and look up at them and discuss about whether they was made or only just happened. Jim, he allowed they was made, but I allowed they happened. I judged it would have took too long to make so many. Jim said the moon could have laid them. Well, that looked kind of reasonable, so I didn't say nothing against it, because I've seen a frog lay most as many. So, of course, it could be done. We used to watch the stars that fell, too, and see them streak down. Jim allowed they'd got spoiled and was hove out of the nest. Once or twice of a night, we'd see a steamboat slipping along in the dark. And now and then she'd belch a whole world of sparks up out of her chimney, and they'd rain down in the river and look awful pretty. Then she'd turn a corner and her lights would wink out and her powwow shut off and leave the river still again. And by her waves would get to us a long time after she is gone and joggle the raft a bit. And after that, you wouldn't hear nothing, for you couldn't tell how long, except maybe frogs or something. After midnight, people on shore went to bed. And then for 2 or 3 hours, the shore was black. No more sparks in the cabin windows. These sparks was our clock. The first one that showed again meant morning was coming. So we hunted a place to hide and tie up right away. One morning, about daybreak, I found a
That's where we're gonna pause. This is right where the Duke and the King come and interrupt this scene. So what I want you to do now, this is why I had you open up your book. I want you to find at least 3 words that you think help justify the way that you were visualizing the tone. So if you've got like a lot of warm colors, what is one word that helped you kind of come up with that idea of warmth? If you have, a really like nice sort of like sunset, where are you finding the word to justify that part? So what you're looking for here is not necessarily like if you drew a boat, I did a raft, right? You're looking for tone words. Tone words that justify your artistic choices. Yeah. Okay, and what you're gonna do is incorporate these into your picture. So, because we're doing a different scene on the backside, you're going to incorporate the tone words into the picture itself. So think about a word like stars, for example. That they say the word stars. That could be a tone word. I think it kind of creates this vastness to the scene because you're thinking about like sort of the whole your tiny little hub and like the vastness of the universe. Maybe you want to represent stars then as like, little stars in your picture. Or maybe you're looking at the word Megan and you want to say, oh, this scene is like funny. You could kind of write it in, Comic Sans or whatever. Yes, so you are trying to incorporate the 3 tone words that you find into your actual picture. Does that make sense? Okay, repeat it back to me because I'm not sure you heard me. What are you doing with the tone words? Okay, good. Like, do we actually write for it? Yes. So I'm gonna give you like 5 minutes is all to kind of like finish, find those tone words. Let's do 10 minutes. Find those tone words, finish up what you think that scene feels like. Yeah.
There we go.
On the picture. Yeah. You incorporate it into the actual picture. We're using the backside for something else.
Spicy.
Not very good. It goes until Yeah, you try and incorporate them into the picture somehow. You like my whole fishing? Yes. Okay, only one. We'll have to see though which is the better slide, the front or the back, because we're gonna do a back side too. Yeah, we're gonna do two separate.
These trees.
Oh, you need paper.
Oh,
You might need a new paper because we're gonna be looking at a different seat.
I should make it 10. I thought it was 10. I was like, "You're gonna say."
When Sherburne
I should
and
make it 10.
Bob fighting.
Who cares? Could be wrong. Maybe I should update most of that. The king of the Jew. Yeah. That's what you feel. Yeah, that's how I felt. This is the trick that tells you.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you 3 more minutes. to decide. I was drawing mine. Define the word on the island that justifies your artistic purpose. So, like, small. Oh, no. You have to buy that. Yeah, loans.
Oh, so this right there. Oh, it's shot that. I'm just shocked at it. Longer. I should have done that. I should have done that. Stillness. Thank you so much. There's oh, what is that app? It's called Calm. That's what it's like. It's so. I think it's.
It's like paying for Spotify.
I bet there's stuff like that. I bet there's stuff like that.
Okay. Tell me about your picture. In fact, who would volunteer to show the class their picture and talk about why they made their choices? 2 volunteers.
Katie and Dow are volunteers. What? Yep. I don't volunteer.
Okay, here's what we'll do. In your small groups that you normally work in, share your pictures, picture sharing time, and tell them about the tone words that you chose.
Like when I say it's about. So. Yeah. I think that's a part.
Okay, clever. So I'm playing colors. So.
So you're gonna critique my tweet.
Yeah. Like I said. And then like the yellow is like a smile.
Okay, I have to move to the main classroom. I can't unplug from the computer, so hopefully you are able to hear me.
Okay.
As I'm looking at your pictures, for the most part, they look like pretty pleasant scenes. I'm gonna show you.
Okay.
Look how beautiful.
Shut up.
Bro, what?
I just it's just so much.
Yes.
So much.
It's so good.
Yes, so.
What? No.
Okay, so, and then we've got like really abstract ones. Can I show it? Oh, show it. We've got these abstract ones that are like the blue, kind of like combines with the oranges and reds, creates this like really pleasant looking scene, right? Okay, so in the book, look on page 94. At the top of 94, because I also saw a lot of people though who used the word lonesome, and yet the scenes still look pretty beautiful. So look at the top, it says, then for about an hour, there would be nothing to hear nor nothing to see, just solid lonesomeness. So I think other places in the book, lonesome has made us feel like really bad for Huck, like especially when he's living with the widow Douglas and he just doesn't feel like he belongs. And he constantly talks about how lonesome he is. And then we get that great scene when Jim shows up on the island and he says, I was ever so glad to see Jim. I wasn't lonesome now. So it's like this way that like lonesome is just the traditional way to think of it, like being lonely, right? But it has a different feel to it on this, in this scene, where he's describing going down the river on a raft. He says, just, there would be nothing to hear nor nothing to see, just solid lonesomeness. How does the meaning change? Yeah. Yeah, what do you mean by that? Yeah. Yes. Yes, I totally agree. So like, it's interesting that earlier when he talks about being lonesome, he is living in the suburbs, he's surrounded by people. But here when he's like actually alone, it's like a kind of peaceful lonesomeness that you're not feeling lonely, you're just alone and you're okay with that, you know, state of being alone, except for him and Jim. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a little bit further down. It says, so he would put in the day, lazying around, listening to the stillness. Get me? Well, I think it's the opposite. Piano Man, right? Piano Man is about how we might be together, but we're so lonely that we have to drown out our sorrows. So this is more like here we are on this raft and we're alone, but it gives us this feeling of peacefulness and stillness. I don't think they'd have to drown out their sorrows. You know? Katie?
It reminds me of like a mom with like really crazy kids and she has to like lock herself in a closet to like be alone.
To get that stillness. I think that's a really good way to transition into this next part, because you're right. The river is this place of stillness. The idea that Jim has about stars, like the moon laid the stars and pushed them out of the nest, that's like the most beautiful idea to me. Like, it's just almost this like fantasy realm where nothing is getting to them. And even people who are like on the river with them, they don't really interact with them at all. So it's like they're far in the distance. Okay, and they get to be totally free. Here are these, it's a little uncomfortable because yes, Jim is in his probably early 30s and Huck is 13, but they've got this like just complete freedom here on the raft. They don't have to worry about anybody judging them. So whereas before Huck was in these starchy, uncomfortable clothes, now he's like, I'm naked all of the time. I love life, you know, just really chilling. All right. Yeah, but whatever. It doesn't go there. It's lucky. So now we're going to look at chapter 22 as a way. Oh, nope, chapter 23. Nope, sorry. Chapter 21. Go to page 111. And I think this is a pretty good chapter to show the juxtaposition then between the river and its state of calmness and the craziness that's on land. So to use Katie's like metaphor, this is like the mom has to go back into the kitchen where all 7 of her kids are screaming, right? So flip your page over, your drawing. And you're gonna do another tone drawing. Does anyone want a new piece of paper?
This is yes.
I know.
Okay, and you're doing the same thing where you are drawing kind of the feeling of the scene. Luke, you want to put the-
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, you ready? Okay, this is the scene where Hut comes to town and he sees Sherburne and Boggs.
A litter of pigs come lazying along the street and wallop herself right down in the way where folks had to walk around her. And she'd stretch out and shut her eyes and wave her ears whilst the pigs was milking her and look as happy as if she was on salary. And pretty soon you'd hear a loafer sing out, Hey, so boy, sick 'em, tag. And away the sow would go, squealing most horrible, with a dog or two swinging to each ear, and 3 or 4 dozen more a coming. And then you'd see all the loafers get up and watch the thing out of sight, and laugh at the fun, and look grateful for the noise. Then they'd settle back again till there was a dog fight. There couldn't anything wake 'em up all over and make 'em happy all over like a dog fight. Unless it might be putting turpentine on a stray dog and setting fire to him, or tying a tin pail to his tail and see him run himself to death. On the riverfront, some of the houses was sticking out over the bank, and they was bowed and bent and about ready to tumble in. The people had moved out of them. The bank was caved away under one corner of some others, and that corner was hanging over. People lived in them yet, but it was dangersome, because sometimes a strip of land as wide as a house caves in at a time. Sometimes a belt of land 1/4 of a mile deep will start in and cave along till it all caves into the river in one summer. Such a town as that has to be always moving back and back and back, because the river is always gnawing it. The nearer it got to noon that day, the thicker and thicker was the wagons and horses in the streets, and more coming all the time. Families fetched their dinners with them from the country and eat them in the wagons. There was considerable whiskey drinking going on, and I seen 3 fights. By and by, somebody sings out, "Here comes old Boggs in from the country for his little old monthly drunk. Here comes, boys." All the loafers looked glad. I reckon they was used to having fun out of Boggs. One of them says, "Wonder who he's going to chaw up this time. If he'd have chawed up all the men he's been a-going to chaw up in the last 20 years, he'd have a considerable reputation now." Another one says, "I wished old Boggs had threatened me, 'cause then I'd know I weren't going to die for 1,000 years." Boggs comes a-tearing along on his horse, whooping and yelling like an Injun and singing out, "Clear the track there, I'm on the warpath, and the price of coffins is going to rise." He was drunk and weaving about in his saddle. He was over 50-year-old and had a very red face. Everybody yelled at him and laughed at him and sassed him, and he sassed back and said he'd attend to them and lay them out in their regular turn. But he couldn't wait now, because he'd come to town to kill old Colonel Sherburne. And his motto was meat first and spoon victuals to top off on. He see me and rode up and says, "Where do you come from, boy? You prepared to die?" And then he rode on. I was scared, but a man says he don't mean nothing. He's always a-carrying on like that when he's drunk. He's the best naturedest old fool in Arkansas. Never hurt nobody, drunk nor sober. Boggs rode up before the biggest store in town and bent his head down so he could see under the curtain of the awning and yells, "Come on here, Sherburne. Come on with me, the man you've swindled. You're the hound I'm after, and I'm going to have you too." And so he went on, calling Sherburne everything he could lay his tongue to. And the whole street packed with people listening and laughing and going on. By and by, a proud-looking man, about 55, and he was a heap the best-dressed man in that town, too, steps out of the store, and the crowd drops back on each side to let him come. He says to Boggs, mighty calm and slow, he says, "I'm tired of this, but I'll endure it till 1 o'clock. Till 1 o'clock, mind, no longer. If you open your mouth against me only once after that time, you can't travel so far, but I'll find you." Then he turns and goes in. The crowd looks mighty sober. Nobody stirred, and there weren't no more laughing. Boggs rode off, blackguarding Sherburne as loud as he could yell all down the street. And pretty soon he comes and stops before the store, still keeping it up. Some men crowded round him and tried to get him to shut up, but he wouldn't. They told him it'd be 1 o'clock in about 15 minutes, and so he must go home. He must go right away. But didn't do no good. He cussed away with all his might, throwed his hat down in the mud, and rode over it. Pretty soon away he went a-raging down the street again with his gray hair flying. Everybody that could get a chance at him tried their best to coax him off his horse so they could lock him up and get him sober, but it weren't no use. Up the street he'd tear again and give Sherburne another cuss. By and by somebody says, "Go for his daughter, quick, go for his daughter. Sometimes he'll listen to her. If anybody can persuade him, she can." So somebody started on a run. I walked down the street a ways and stopped. In about 5 or 10 minutes, here comes Boggs again, but not on his horse. He was a-reeling across the street towards me, bareheaded, with a friend on both sides of him, a hold of his arms and hurrying him along. He was quiet and looked uneasy, and he weren't handing back at me, but was doing some of the hurrying himself. Somebody sings out, "Boggs!" I looked over there to see who said it, and it was that Colonel Sherburne. He was standing perfectly still in the street and had a pistol raised in his right hand, not aiming it, but holding it out with the barrel tilted up towards the sky. The same second, I see a young girl coming on the run and 2 men with her. Boggs and the men turned round to see who'd called it. And when they see the pistol, the men jumped to one side and the pistol barrel come down slow and steady to a level, both barrels cocked. Boggs throws up both his hands and says, "Oh, Lord, don't shoot." Bang goes the first shot, and he staggers back, clawing at the air. Bang goes the second one, and he tumbles backwards onto the ground, heavy and solid, with his arms spread out. That young girl screamed out and comes rushing, and down she throws herself on her father, crying and saying, "Oh, he's killed him, he's killed him." The crowd closed up around them, shouldered and jammed one another with their necks stretched, trying to see. And people on the inside trying to shove him back and shouting, "Back, back, give him air, give him air." Colonel Sherburne, he tossed his pistol onto the ground and turned around on his heels and walked off. They took Boggs to a little drugstore, the crowd pressing around just the same, and the whole town followed. And I rushed and got a good place at the window where I was close to him and could see in. They laid him on the floor and put one large Bible under his head and opened another one and spread it on his breast. But they tore open his shirt first, and I seen where one of the bullets went in. He made about a dozen long gasps, his breast lifting the Bible up when he drawed in his breath and letting it down again when he breathed it out. And after that, he laid still. He was dead. Then they pulled his daughter away from him, screaming and crying, and took her off. She was about 16 and very sweet and gentle looking, but awful pale and scared. Well, pretty soon the whole town was there, squirming and scrooging and pushing and shoving to get at the window and have a look. The people that had the places wouldn't give them up. And folks behind him was saying all the time, "Say now, you've looked enough, you fellas. Tain't right and tain't fair for you to stay there all the time and never give nobody a chance. Other folks has their rights as well as you." There was considerable jawing back, so I slid out, thinking maybe there was going to be trouble. The streets was full and everybody was excited. Everybody that seen the shooting was telling how it happened. And there was a big crowd packed around each one of these fellas, stretching their necks and listening. One long, lanky man with long hair and a big white fur stovepipe hat on the back of his head, and a crooked-handled cane, marked out the places on the ground where Boggs stood and where Sherburne stood, and the people following him around from one place to other, and watching everything he done, and bobbing their heads to show they understood, and stooping a little and resting their hands on their thighs to watch him mark the places on the ground with his cane. And then he stood up straight and stiff where Sherburne had stood, frowning and having his hat brimmed down over his eyes, and sung out, "Boggs," and then fetched his cane down slow to a level and says, "Bang," staggered backwards, says bang again, and fell down flat on his back. The people that had seen the thing said he done it perfect, said it was just exactly the way it all happened. Then as much as a dozen people got out their bottles and treated him. Well, by and by, somebody said Sherburne ought to be lynched. In about a minute, everybody was saying it. So away they went, mad and yelling and snatching down every clothesline that come to do the hanging with.
Okay, that's where we're gonna end. It's at the end of that chapter. So we started on page 111 and it went to the end of the chapter, find 3 tone words to incorporate into this picture now. Everyone is here today. Wow. Okay, let's just do 2 more minutes of this one. Lots of people are done. Just finish yours up. Okay, here is, you can share your pictures with your little, show them your.
Okay. So let's get right into it. We got the house on the river. Yeah. This one is being used by. Well, this is the rest of the town. It's like dog fighting. This is his dog. No, it's the people's. I did it. This is his father. This is the guy that shot him. This is the guy that got shot. So Ben, and then loud, it's like energy is like, you know, it's very loud. Like here's why it's late, and he doesn't have like a little bit. Yeah. It's like, and then there are people that are sad. I just did like. Anyways, it's kind of like over. It says depressing. I did kill.
Okay. I think it's pretty clear that this second scene has a much different tone than the first scene, right? It starts with cruelty to animals, which like as humans, we react to that strongly, maybe even more strongly than cruelty to people. And then it just gets more and more like bloody, more and more hypocritical, more and more chaotic and unsettling. So I think that the difference between the tones are clear. Now, in your little groups where you share your pictures, I want you to answer this question. What is Twain's argument about the river versus society, about the pastoral scene versus the social scene? Ultimately, what do you think the theme is that he's trying to come up with, not trying to come up with, you're trying to come up with? What's the theme he is creating about the difference between these two settings? Discuss.
And that's crazy.
That's a good one. Okay, I'm hearing a lot about river is better. I want you to be able to articulate exactly why. Talk in your groups for another minute. Why?
Because they're free.
People are bad. Why? Why are people so bad?
She hates me.
Okay. Okay, tell me, what do you think his argument is between, about the difference between the pastoral and society in the South?
It's like, the pastoral part is actually like, nature part is fantastic, but the really, people don't see it.
Okay, nature,
Nature good
people. All right, so over here we got bad. Over here we've got good. And these people ruin nature. Okay, in what way do people ruin nature?
I think like, especially when something like putting a house like right on the face, it's like how like nature is like almost overpowering people like trying to impose on nature.
Posing. Okay, good. How do we add to this thing?
I think it has to do with quantity,
Okay.
that if you're more individualistic and to your own ideals. It'll be better to try and conform with society.
Okay, so nature provides, let's see, space for individuality. And in society with people, in fact, I'm going to change this to society. And people, there's like pressure to conform. And if people are bad, then the pressure to conform is also going to be bad because you're going to become bad, right? So doesn't that suggest that like at our core, like nature, maybe our nature is inherently good? Inherently good at core. Okay, cool. Yeah. Oh, okay. So then society makes things like, it's a pressure to conform, but it's like uncertain, it breeds uncertainty. Okay, good.
I think nature is just freedom in general. You're able to do what you want and just be okay with it. Nothing will happen. Society makes you choose. It's just, it makes you choose what is best for society than what you want.
Okay, so when you're in society, you have to think about other people.
Yes. Because it's like anything can change.
And when you have to think about other people and people are bad, there's this like pressure to conform to think about them, but why should you be changing your inherently good nature to fit into society? Yeah.
I also study like people in nature, like they're just like, oh, I can do stuff and no one will like on myself.
Yeah.
But then my society is like, oh, you did this and we're gonna threaten like kill you.
Yeah, okay, good. So if bugs were out on the raft getting drunk, he'd be fine. And the problem is that bugs is in town getting drunk and nobody wants him to bug them anymore, right? So there's this like absence of guilt and shame. What's so interesting is like, you can imagine a different story having the complete opposite theme, right? That a different story on the river is where dangerous things happen. And then once you get into the community, everybody sort of, bonds together and they help solve the problem of nature. That's actually the more common story, but the pastoral flips that. And suddenly nature is the beautiful, simplistic, individualistic place, and society is the problem. It's actually a very transcendental theme, isn't it? Yeah. Sure is. Okay, so what I want you to do now is on your pictures, there's somewhere on your pictures, either front or back, it doesn't matter, where you can fit in a theme. So you had a discussion about what the theme is here. We detailed what the theme is. A theme, just to reiterate, is a complete sentence that describes the truth about human nature. The way the book sees it. So what does this book believe is a truth about human nature? Write that on one of your pictures. Find a space for it. And if you want to work with your group to come up with your theme, you can. Try and get specific. Try and incorporate a bunch of this.
Also without we wouldn't have.
Yeah, there was.
No, because of population. Wildlife.
It would only be wildlife.
That's true. No, there's no, so there's the wildlife is screwed because of what happened.
What?
So you were taking out right now.
Okay.
Wildlife.
Okay, I'm gonna give you 2 more minutes to work out what you think your theme is and write it down on your paper.
No, we took out humans. We took out.
Actually, volcanoes.
Anyway, let's not do that. Let's get back to humans are. Yeah, let's do that. Have the one cards just for you.
The whole thing.
Okay, how many have a theme written down right now? Okay, one more minute.
You would never satisfy an order. Because I think founder. It's a universal truth.
Hey, that's my, hey. No, we don't want to see. I know. I know.
My drawing's better, that's good.
So combine it.
Right.
It's kind of all of it.
Right,
You
right,
draw,
machine on that.
or you write it,
Right, machine.
or I take the paper and you guys. Oh, ruins.
They ruined it. Is that better? Let's see how it makes.
Okay, so I think, based on this discussion, I think a lot of you like have something about how, people who are living in nature, people who are living as individuals outside of community, they have the possibility of thriving. They have the possibility of being totally free and therefore like moral to build like actual secure relationships with each other, the way that Huck and Jim do, and they can be at peace, right? And for people who are living in communities, it's covered in mud, it's dirty, it's violent. Communities have this tendency to like bring out the worst, we bring out the worst in each other, maybe through competition, maybe through just the way that we annoy each other. And this kind of leads us to conform to try and fit into society's values to avoid that kind of like chaos, right? I think that's true in this book. But at the same time, these two characters exist as characters in a society. So how awesome would it be if they could live on a raft their whole life? Yes, that would be wonderful. They could just go down. They can just head down the Mississippi River, just chilling and fishing and having a great time, right? But the realities of the situation is that sometimes they have to get off that raft. And the reality of the situation is that Jim's a runaway slave. And so as soon as he gets off that raft, he is in danger from society, right? Also, his wife and kids live in society, and he can't just like ignore that fact. So as happy as Huck is living on this raft, Jim is very excited to get to Cairo to actually get to freedom. So we got a second word of the day. Sorry, I'm making you pull out word of the day. Oh, whoa. We got words of the day. Are we ready? Yeah. All right, our second word of the day is this word liminal. No, don't write down the quote, only write down the definition. Liminal, which is occupying a position at or on both sides of a boundary or threshold. So usually we use the word liminal with the word space. We'll say liminal space or liminal spaces. And we're talking about borders there. So it could be the borders of two countries, like you cross the border from the United States into Mexico, and for a second there, you're in liminal space where you're not in Mexico or the United States, you're kind of in both at once. Yeah, if you go to Four Corners, you can be in liminal space for a while, kind of going between the different states, right? You can also think about it though in terms of like boundaries between ideas. So like if you're sort of, okay, like you're 17, maybe 18, you're sort of like on this boundary between being a teenager and being a young adult, and it's like unclear exactly what you are. That would be a kind of liminal space. So it's anywhere where you're like kind of occupying two things at once. I think Huck spends a lot of time in liminal space in his head, where it's like, I don't want to give up Jim, but I want to feel comfortable in my society, so I do want to give up Jim. And he has this like ambivalent attitude where he's like kind of in between the two. That'd be an example of liminal space. So I think this quote kind of articulates what's useful about liminal space, where we are betwixt and between the familiar and the completely unknown. There alone is our old world left behind, while we are not yet sure of the new existence. That's a good space where genuine newness can begin. Get there often and stay as long as you can by whatever means possible. This is the sacred space where the old world is able to fall apart and a bigger world is revealed. If we don't encounter liminal space in our lives, we start idealizing normalcy. The threshold of God's waiting room. Here we are taught openness and patience as we come to expect an appointment with the divine doctor. All right, what is this guy talking about is like part of the like positive qualities of liminal space. What's good about not existing in one place or another, but kind of existing between? Yeah, okay, if you just stay, no, just keep that. If you just stay in one space forever, you have such a limited perspective. So by like verging into other spaces, it like widens the perspective. Yeah, okay, so new opportunities. It's like just by transitioning from one to the next, you have this whole like sort of space of like opportunity available to you. And because you haven't committed to one or the other, the opportunities of the other place are still available to you too. So it like widens sort of the scope of your perspective and opportunities. Anything else that works well in liminal space? What about this idea? That if we don't get to a liminal space, we start idealizing normalcy. What's wrong with idealizing normalcy, do you think? Isn't it good to be normal? Okay, it takes away individuality. Everyone would just be exactly the same. Yeah, so existing in these kind of spaces are a way of like challenging your view of reality. Yeah. Okay, yeah, so if you are not willing to like approach those borders, then you're not gonna change. Okay, cool. I think this is true. I think it's amazing to be in liminal space sometimes, to not know what you think, like to not have, this is foreign to me because I love having opinions, but to like not have an opinion on something and to just be in a place where I'm like listening to everyone else's opinions, that can be a really exciting, nice place to be. What could be, I'm gonna turn this off. What could be some problems with living in liminal space? This space where you are between two things, not one thing or the other. Yeah, Josh.
When you mentioned that.
Okay, yeah, and why wouldn't you know what to do if you're in this like liminal
Well,
box?
because if you don't have an opinion, or don't know what to decide, because are kind of like.
Yeah. All right. So there's this idea that you might be neutral in this kind of place, that you won't be able to make a decision because you aren't firmly on one side or the other. Jason?
I was saying, if you are just not deciding, you know, what happens when you have to make a decision.
We have to decide our positions sometimes. We can't just be neutral forever. We're kind of like those decisions are forced upon us. Even in places like the river in Hudson, those decisions are forced upon him when somebody approaches in another raft. And yeah.
This like, oh yeah, choose this, then you're like, oh, okay, and then if you're having to
Leads to consequences, and because you were not able to state your own position on that thing, those consequences are totally out of your control. So things can spiral in these kinds of ways. Not one full thing or the other. If you're not sure about what you are. So here is Huck, loving river life, loving raft life. And suddenly the Duke and the King come along. They like jump out of the forest. They were in different situations, but somehow coincidentally both end up on this raft. And what happens with the King and the Duke? Yes, that's true. That is what ultimately happens. But at this point in the book, when the King and the Duke take over the raft, is life simple and pleasant for Huck and Jim anymore? No, so they are confronted with something that is asking them to make a decision. Like, are you going to go along with these two? Are you going to force them off your raft? Are you going to believe them? And because they've existed, because Huck loves this kind of like sense of freedom and liminal space so much, he doesn't make a decision. He goes along with what's easiest. And this leads to a spiral of consequences out of his control. So we're going to be talking about this idea later. I just wanted you to have the definition. So don't worry about the rest of the work. And that is it for today. No, you get to keep your drawings forever. Oh, thank you. Okay, I will keep yours forever. Here we go, Gavin. We'll put it up here. Oh, we should go on that purple green. Thanks. Okay, so hopefully you heard the end there. I had to leave this back because I needed the projector. But let me know if you have any questions about what you're supposed to do.